Hey guys, welcome back to the show. If you think you know everything there is to know about testing for bone density, my guest today has something to teach us all. This is an aspect of bone health that very few people have the ability to look into, and we also don't often really think about it. We think about how many minerals are in our bones, but we don't always think about being able to assess all of the other bone qualities that make it that our bones are going to be as resilient, as strong as we need them for as long as we need them. So that's the episode. I, of course, want to thank you guys all for being here today and for following the show, especially lately with all the comments and the questions, everything that I'm getting on Instagram at Natalie Nidham. And it is amazing. And I'm very grateful for you guys for being here, because when you're here, that means I get to do what I love. So if you're feeling inspired about this episode, of course, make sure that you leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to the show on. And if you have any questions about anything else that I do, like my membership, the private membership community, or to sign up for the newsletter, just head on over to natnidham.com and everything will be there. All right, so let's talk about this episode a little bit. Today, I'm joined by bone health expert Gary Rhodes to delve into an aspect of bone health that is often overlooked: bone quality. Now, Gary's a great guy. You guys are going to love him. I mean, when I first met him at A4M, I think it was last year, and he just blew me away with his energy and his enthusiasm. He's just a one-of-a-kind kind of guy. I think you guys are really going to enjoy him. So what we talk about is we make the distinction between bone density and bone quality. And this is an angle that is rarely discussed, and it's where people really get into trouble with a lot of the bone density medications. Yet this is critical to whether or not people are at risk of fractures. Now, we cover the significant factors, obviously, that influence bone health: nutrition, digestion, exercise, and we delve into the increased risks presented by medications and high-risk lifestyles. Now, Gary is leading the charge with an innovative device that is providing insight that few other technologies can. You will learn about the latest developments in bone scanning technology, which includes the Echolite REMS, and where effective practices like biodensity training and power plate therapy fit in to help us build better, stronger bones. Now, overall, this episode is going to provide you with valuable insights and practical steps for monitoring and improving bone health, ultimately enhancing your longevity and quality of life. Now, if you are a physician or a practitioner with an office, you're going to want to pay special attention. You may want to reach out to Gary, because he's on a mission to bring this technology worldwide. So if this is something that captures your attention, we might just need to connect you to Gary. All right. So you can find out more about Gary and his technology at, performancehealthmsk.com. So M like mother, so musculoskeletal. So performancehealthmsk.com. You can also find out more about Gary at GaryRhodes360.io. You can find him on Instagram, Gary Rhodes 360, LinkedIn. He is linkedin.com/in/biohacker. Look, all of these links are going to be in the show notes. I don't want to waste your time here. Definitely look him up. This guy is next level. Now let's jump into the episode.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider.
Gary Rhodes, it is a total pleasure to have you here today. Lord knows we've worked for this episode.
We have.
Yeah. Chasing you all over the world, but you finally got pinned down, not by me, actually.
Yeah, non-stop moving. So my apologies first, because I know we've tried to do this a few times, but I've either been in a plane, train, or side of a motorway somewhere.
Yeah. Everything happens when it needs to happen.
Yeah,
you know, it's at the end of the day, it's all as it should be. So we are going to talk today about bones, and you know, I think people are starting to understand. A lot of people understand that bone density can become an issue as we age, but what I love about what you talk about and the way you talk about it is that, you know, as we all know, health issues don't happen. I mean, unless you get hit by a bus, things tend to evolve over a period of time. And so I just wanted to start the conversation by really talking about bones and the relationship between our bones and muscles, and how building healthy bones happens, and what can go wrong, and all the things.
Where do we even start? So, I mean, obviously, bones are important. It's the very thing that's holding us together. But because we can't see the bones, we tend to often forget them. But obviously, as we're young infants, and we from having milk to then start walking and be weight bearing, you hear kids and they're running around and they're like little baby elephants just stomping. This is where the bone's really being built with good nutrition and impact. And as we get older, we want to make sure that we get to peak bone mass. So yeah, bone is so important, and not just for structure, but as 60% of magnesium is housed in the bone. It's the battery. It's the muscles are connected to the bone. We can go on, but fundamentally, bone density is really important. But so is the bone quality, which I'm sure we'll get onto.
Well, and I think that's the piece that gets missed by a lot of people, right? The bone. We all talk about bone density. People think of good bones as strong and hard bones, but there's a lot of nuance around the concept of healthy skeletal structure, healthy bones, because I think one of the things that people often forget is that bones need to be able to flex. They need to be able to bend. And I think, we can even talk a little bit about what can cause people sometimes to build brittle bones. And we forget that collagen is an integral piece of bone matrix.
Completely,
and
yeah.
gives it that flex. Yeah. So bone quality over bone density is really critical. So maybe we can also start to talk a little bit about a couple of definitions. So people will sometimes come out and say, well, I've been just diagnosed with osteopenia, or I have osteoporosis, or I know someone who has osteoporosis. And we know that one leads to the other, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about osteopenia and osteoporosis, and maybe some of the causes that some of them that people know, like people know that when women go through menopause, they become much more prone, but there's other ways that other things that can drive these issues.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, when people generally hear osteoporosis, so when we think of bones, we hear osteoporosis, and depending on where we are in life, if we're young and athletic and in his 30s, 40s, and even 50s, we tend to think it's for more the senior deconditioned people. But if you was to look at a graph, just to simplify it, you would literally have a green, a yellow, and red, and it's like a traffic light system. So you would have normal bone, and normal bone is classed of people of your age, and we hit peak bone mass around 30 years old. So, all of us, bone building and everything is done typically by age 30. So really we're on a decline at age 30 and we start to lose 1 or 2% a year. But if you were to look at a scan, you would see normal bone density, then you would see osteopenia, which is the onset of osteoporosis, which is basically the bones are starting to degrade and are below the normative data. So if you was 35 and you had minus 1.1, there'd be a line where you'd be 1 above or 1 below. And if you're below that, well, we can pretty much work out the later chapters of your age and when you're going to hit osteopenia or osteoporosis. And then finally you have red, which is osteoporosis, which is, the sort of towards the later end of bone degradation, which would normally be associated when you're 65 or over. However, as we are all growing and getting nutrition, there's so many different ways. We would generally think that it's only when you're older, but we look at menopausal women, loss of estrogen. There's a direct correlation to losing quite a huge percentage of bone density over the years. So menopausal women really should be getting a bone scan, and a lot of times this is left out because we're trying to work out on HRT and hormone replacements and identity crisis and all sorts that's going on. We tend to often forget the bones, and then you look at maybe an athlete that maybe is overtraining but not getting the nutrients. They may be taking them, but they're not able to absorb them. So a lot of the time, for example, if you fill the bath, and you fill it for an hour and it takes an hour to fill it, but you've got the plug out, we have to check that the plug's in to make sure we're filling it up there. So there's so many ways where not every single person will hit peak bone mass, and the thing is we don't know because we don't check. We only scan people generally when they've broken a bone or they're over 65. So to categorize bone health in a simple format, you have green, yellow, red, normal bones, osteopenia, and osteoporosis.
Yeah. You bring up a couple of interesting points. If we hit peak bone mass at age 30, and you consider people who might be, and you mentioned nutrition, which I think is really interesting because so many people walk around with impaired digestion. And one of the things that, again, flies under the radar for a lot of people is even if you're eating the right diet, if your digestion's off, if you're not producing enough digestive enzymes, your body's not able to break those things down, can't absorb them, and therefore can't assimilate them. And that can happen really young. Like that can happen almost at any age. And I think if you also layer on the fact that so many people are sedentary, especially these days, if you've got kids almost in two groups, right? They're either into sports, and so they're moving all the time and they're doing the thing. And then you've got a whole other group of young people who are quite sedentary because they're doing things online, or, they're on a different track. And do you think that that can actually probably play a factor in what your peak bone density is at age 30? Because peak bone density doesn't mean we're all going to ring the bell. It means it's going to be whatever peak bone density you manage, which is kind of like, how full is your bucket now that it's going to start to empty a little bit?
Completely. Listen, I mean, it's a great point you bring up about nutrition and digestion, because we can't just assume that it's the bell at 30 and we start, osteoporosis really does start at age 30. Let's just say if that's the case. But we know that, people might be undernourished, lack of movement. So we're either speeding us way up to osteoporosis or we're slowing it down. We're all aging. We can't get away from it. When you think about the bone building blocks of osteoblasts, are the blocks that start to build new bone, and osteoblasts are the cells that start to eat the old bone away. And that's the cycle of life. We're building 2 bricks a day, and osteoclasts are eating 1 away. So that's healthy. That's the cycle. But it's when osteoblasts start only building 1.5, and you have the osteoclasts now eating 1.5. Now you've plateaued. And if the osteoclasts start eating a little bit more, well, if it's only half more than it's building, it's declining. And it's at what rate you're losing bone density. And that's where impact is super important. We talk about exercise and nutrition. We have to really look at the components here that accelerate increased bone density, because we don't know at what rate we are losing. Now, there's blood tests you can take to see what the turnover markers are, but nobody's going to even do that because they're not even getting the basic scans. So we really have to check, at what rate are we losing bone density? And if you're a high-end athlete, you're going to be checking your methylation, you're going to be checking your digestion, your absorption rate, your vitamin D3, your collagen, all the raw materials. But even when you get high-end athletes that are training, and we have some of the world's best athletes on planet Earth that we've screened, and we're working with the biodensity and power plates and other modalities to help accelerate the whole musculoskeletal system, that we're seeing people in their mid-20s, and okay, they might not have peak bone mass, but they are so lower down than we would expect them to be. And people in their 30s, athletes in the 35s. When I say athletes, I'm not talking world-class athletes, because their career is probably over at late 20s, but we're talking high performers at 35 that have midline osteopenia, that when you look at them, they look incredibly fit. The nutrition's dialed in. Perceptually, you would look at them and think, well, if they have got it wrong, then there's no chance for any of us. But then when we go through the tick box like a captain, they're very clear. They go through the cockpit check, and there's things they've got to check, and they go through it before they even take off. We kind of have to look at our health in that same manner. So when we go through it and they say, well, we're taking this vitamin D3, where we have people around us, nutritional coaches, rehabilitation, they've got the Formula One team. And then when we pick out and actually do it, it's like, okay, you've been taking vitamin D3 and K2 and the collagen and the magnesium, but actually we've checked and you're actually really deficient in D3. It's like, when was the last time you checked? Oh, well, I haven't. I've just been taking 5,000 IUs, more than most people would take and would accept that. But the reality is we don't check. And that's why it's so important to check, to put the things in place and then retest, recheck, because we've got information that we can check early on and not just expect it because we're doing something like we're eating food. I love what you just said. The essence of nutrition is to put food in your mouth, chew it, digest it, push it through the body and be able to eliminate it. Most people have a basic plumbing problem. They put food in their mouth, they can't assimilate, they can't digest, and they can't eliminate, so they get backed up. And then you can see how that could throw all the other systems of the body out. So
Yeah. Well, and I think when you're talking about athletes, and this can affect even people who are not athletes, if your cortisol levels are high all the time, and I think you would see that in athletes that are overtraining, not recovering, and in any of us walking around, I think one of the things that really gets missed with cortisol, which is that stress hormone, which we need, by the way, or otherwise we'd never get out of bed, because, it's cozy and nice. But cortisol is a catabolic hormone. Catabolic meaning it breaks down. And so when you have chronically elevated levels, there's a breakdown that happens in the system constantly. And I think with your your high performers, they push through or get away with it, but there's a cost. And something that you said earlier, which is so true, is we don't see our bones. We don't have a visual. We can see that our muscles might not be developed or they're shrinking or whatever the case may be, but you can't notice that the bone mass is suffering because of whether it's elevated cortisol or, you get some men doing testosterone therapy who are blocking estrogen, not realizing that if you overly block estrogen, even in men, there's a consequence. Well, there's few consequences, but one of them could be that their bones suffer as well.
Yeah, listen, I think to simplify it for people listening, because I think, listen, when people listen to podcasts, they're looking for the golden nuggets that's going to help move their needle. So to simplify it, we have to look at whether you're a hepatologist and you're a liver guy, I can talk to you 1,000 ways why you need to make sure you've not got stage 3 fatty liver. That's a direct correlation to cardiovascular disease, testosterone, cognitive function. So the reality is we have to make sure that we screen and check. And that's fundamentally, if anybody takes anything from this podcast, we're not selling, DEXA scans. And although we want to get you encouraged to take a scan, we have to make any scan, whatever it is. A lot of people are checking the sleep, the VO2 max, we're checking levels, but muscles are so important. Like you said, we don't have we don't have an obesity crisis, as Dr. Gabrielle Leon says. We have a skeletal health crisis. We're under-muscled and we're under-boned. And when you look at metabolic health, we have to have good quality muscle as well. So it's all connected. It's all interconnected. So it's super important that people realize that let's not ignore the bones. The bones are super important for posture, for housing. It's like the pantry at the house. You've got all of your great minerals in there. And when you just said it, when you're stressed out, cortisol levels rise. That's anabolic. And then the body goes to the bones to pillage what's in there, to pull from the bones. And if you don't have the right minerals, we talk about athletes and when they have high impact levels and training, that's great. We need that stimulus, but we also need for the body to be able to recalcify and pull those minerals into the bone. So if we have one without the other, we're actually speeding up the rate because we're doing the worst thing ever. We're challenging the body in such a way, and then we're not feeding the body the nutrients. So therefore it starts to deplete and starts to wither away. And that's where, people can actually be shocked to realize that they're athletes, but actually they're doing more harm than good, which affects performance.
100%. And just to not to belabor the point, but one of the other hidden reasons, I think, one of the other hidden assaults on bone that people don't realize and this is a medication that a lot of people are on, are proton pump inhibitors, PPIs, or this is what your doctor might prescribe to you when you have heartburn, indigestion, or GERD. And I think one of the dirty little secrets in medicine is that those drugs were designed to be used for at most 6 weeks. And unfortunately, people are getting put on them for indefinitely, right? So rather than helping someone to change their diet, change the way they eat, maybe get a little less stressed when they sit at the table, whatever the root cause is of that indigestion. And sometimes it's even lack of stomach acidity. So that what they really need are digestive enzymes and a good dose of HCl. That we're going the other way because, and maybe you want to explain the mechanism that happens with these proton pump inhibitors, which it's a double whammy. You're getting minerals in the wrong place and you don't get them where you want them, and you're getting them deposited in your blood vessels where they're going to cause trouble for your cardiovascular system.
Yeah, I mean, just to simplify it, because I'm certainly no expert on those, but you just have to simplify it and realize that the tail starts to wag the dog. We're looking at treating the symptoms. And this is why in the medical system, without blame, shaming and judging it, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease care system. And, especially in the NHS here, the doctors are doing the very best they can, but they get very limited time. So when they come in, they're not looking to see what the causation is. And I believe if we really looked at the causation, half of the medication and the, whether it's a PPI, whether it's whatever it is that we're going to give you, a CPAP machine because you can't sleep, or whether we're going to whip your gallbladder out because, you've got influx or digestion, we're going to whip your appendix out or the tonsils out or the adenoids. It goes on and on. Whichever department you're in, if you're a surgeon, you're going to cut it. If you're a doctor, you're going to give some medication. You have to be careful where you go and whose advice we have to become his own doctor and recognize that how we've got here, it's his body telling us something. If the body's not working correctly, that's feedback for you to recognize, okay, I might have indigestion, but why have I got indigestion? Why am I getting reflux? Why is my body producing these certain secretions to let me know? It's great. It's the nervous system speaking to us. So without going too deep on whatever the situation is and why and what effect that has on the body, I want everybody to become their own doctor, Dr. Common Sense. Nobody knows you like you know you, and you know what's going on. And if you actually visited Dr. Truth, which is your own internal guidance system, you'd recognize that actually, if you were to look back the last 30, 60, 90 days or a year and actually go through it, you already have the answers, and you already know, well, actually eating greasy food, not sleeping, being overstressed, going to the gym, actually, what would I expect? My body can't assimilate. The body is the most sophisticated technology on planet Earth. And if we give it the basics of sleep, nutrition, hydration, and movement, and provide the raw materials, and then optimizes emotional state, because the emotions, psychosomatic illness is so true. And, we talk about high-end athletes, having high cortisol. I would argue that, certainly women, I'm not saying men, but women, let's just say particularly, that to kind of take everything in, and they're doing so much for so many people for so long, they kind of forget who they are. So their adrenal glands are burnt consistently because they're constantly alert, okay? And men do have that as well, but fundamentally, we're all athletes in his own right, because the system only knows it as a threat detection system. So if our nervous system's not regulating, it will do what it needs to do hormonally to let us know. And if we're consistently burning the candle, as my father used to say, at both ends, that there's a consequence, and that consequence might be type 2 diabetes. It might be a heart attack. It's at what point have you registered that whatever I'm doing is not a long-term plan for success? And I think we just need to wake up to health. That we have to. I break it down. One of my mentors is Paul Check, and he breaks it down into 4 doctors:
He's great.
Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, Dr. Happy, and Dr. Movement. And I've kind of thrown Dr. Truth in with one of my other mentors, because I think that when you visit Dr. Quiet, meaning time for yourself, the door is knocked upon, and that's Dr. Truth, which is your own internal guidance system. And you have really all the answers. And if you don't have the answers, you can start to think clearly, because we all believe that somebody else has got the answers, because we're in a fight or flight state. And we can't rely on other people, not because they don't know and don't care, but we have to take ownership of that. And we really don't. We kind of hand that over. So yeah, sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there, but it's
but
all
it's
connected.
very true. It's I would say that if there's a theme that's running through, I've been doing this podcasting for about 5 years now, and if there's a theme that is really starting to show up in every single episode, no matter who I'm talking to, what they're talking about, it's this necessity to reconnect with ourselves so that we can rebalance our nervous system. And there's just no healing that can take place without it. And there's a whole lot of degradation that takes place when we stay in that overheated space, if you will. And one of 2 things is going to happen. You're going to either get a giant sign from your body that slams on the brakes, and it's never in a way that you want. It's definitely never at a convenient time. It's never, it's always one of those, what the heck? I got shit to do. I don't have time for this right now. And it's like, yeah, well, you didn't have time for me before. So here's the news. We're shutting you down. So I think that there's no doubt that the foundations are critical. But going beyond the foundations now, you've mentioned impact a few times, and I want to talk a little bit about the types of exercise or the types of physical movement that support good bones. Because, one of the things I think that bears mentioning is we're living longer, and our expectations is that we're going to continue to live well as we live longer. And I know that Dr. Gabrielle Lyons talks about this all the time. It's muscle. Muscle is your organ of longevity, but man, that muscle's got to be attached to strong bones. Otherwise you're kind of in trouble. And the truth of the matter is, if you're building strong muscle, most likely your bones are following suit. But there are particular types of movement and exercise that really lead us, or never mind lead us, that really drive that balance between the osteoclast and osteoblast that you mentioned earlier. And that's a degree of impact. And there's a couple of sports I want to highlight that people do and are very competitive at, but they spend a lot of their energy there, and that's cycling and swimming. And I think there's an interesting paradox there that maybe you want to talk about a tiny bit. They're great workouts, not gonna lie, but there's a piece of the puzzle they can't fill.
Well, we have to see what gets results, right? So, generally, and you mentioned swimmers and cyclists and rowers, we put them in the same category. What do they have in common? The non-weight bearing exercises tend to be. So obviously that's not impact. Now we talk about, let's just break it into categories. We have weightlifting, we have strength training, okay? And if you have osteoporosis, the guidelines are go do some form of weight-bearing exercises. Why? Because when you lift weights, the muscles pull down on the bone hopefully compresses and triggers bone growth. Now, theoretically, that's great. And, if you look at Wolff's Law, which is taught in medical school, it's 100 years worth of research. Axial compression of bone is what stimulates the body's response to increased bone density. The question really has always been is how much force is needed to trigger bone growth? A scientist or research language would be, what's the minimum dose response needed for the intended effects? It's like an aspirin. 1 milligram is going to do nothing, 10,000 is going to kill me, but 200 will just sort my headache out. And with bone density, it's very similar. So when we look at the categories of weightlifting, rowing, swimming, cycling, rugby, gymnast, we just have to break it down and just simplify it. Okay, who has got the strongest bone density in the world? Gymnast.
Little tiny people.
Tends to be the ones that do the most high level of impacts. Now, if you're a rugby player, it's uncontrolled and highly associated with head trauma and breakages now. So I'm not recommending that. It's kind of like, it's like people saying red wine's good for you because of the resveratrol. Well, the amount of red wine that you would need to drink to get the balance it's a great way to say that. Convince yourself. So when we look at astronauts, NASA's not stupid. When astronauts go to space, there's no gravitational pull. So they become very weak and deconditioned. In fact, they have to carry them off the spaceship, literally, because they're so deconditioned. That just shows you how intelligent the body is, because if it's not using it, it then starts to think, I don't need skeletal, I'm just going to start to get rid of it. So that's how it really takes its toll on astronauts. So then when you come back to planet Earth and think, okay, well, why do gymnasts have the strongest bones? Well, because the amount of force that they put through their body when they impact, okay, there's a minimum amount of force that's triggering that bone growth, and they now know it to be an exact amount. It's like the tipping point of boiling water, okay? So if you impact 2 times your body weight, okay, it's great. But if you can load the body 4.2 multiples of your own body weight, that's exactly the amount of force needed to trigger bone growth. So that's an interesting number. So when you look at isometric training, like biodensity, power plate, performance health, this is why I work with the company, because I want to be committed to companies, people, and things that get results in the areas that we're talking about, because so many people talk a good game, but what actually gets the results? And this is why I love Echolite REMS, and we can get onto our scanning anything, is checking it, intervention, and then checking it. And I think with biodensity, this is where my passion comes from. I helped my grandmother reverse osteoporosis in 23 months. She was minus 2.7. Considering osteoporosis starts at minus 2.5, a 79-year-old woman certainly wasn't getting any stronger. So why I mentioned that is because then I didn't know how much density, so how much impact was actually needed to trigger a bone growth. She'd go once a week and she'd challenge the body in 4 different areas, challenging the hip, challenging the clavicle and the wrist, literally strengthening the whole musculoskeletal system. So all of the exercises that are out there, I'm not surprised when I see a high-end athlete that's training. I'm looking at the amount of force that they're putting through the body, and it's not enough to trigger the bone density in what we would like. And then second to that, we also know that when you're moving through range of motion, typical exercise is moving through range of motion. Well, I'm talking about axial compression, meaning like end-to-end compression. So there's no movement through weak range and strong range. You're fixed in a position that doesn't move. So if, for those that people are watching this or just listening, just think about a leg press where you come back to a 120-degree bend, and where your feet are, it does not move. The back seat does not move. So if you're self-loading and trying to push, of course, there's movements within the ligaments and connective tissue, but there becomes a point where it's fixed, and then the nervous system is pushing as hard as it can, but there becomes a point where the nervous system can't push anymore, and that means you've hit your threshold in a safe, controlled way. Now, this is the distinction. We are so much more stronger and capable than we've been led to believe. When we weightlift, we always train the weaker range of motion. When you train from your strongest biomechanical range, you can unleash the power within that you've literally never had and access the capabilities of 4.2 multiples of body weight in a safe way. And that's how I was able to get my grandmother to access those types of loads safely. So when you think about things like biodensity, you really have an opportunity here, whether you're an ironed athlete or a senior deconditioned, or just anybody who wants to trigger bone growth safely, then this is a safe way to do it. And obviously then there's all the things that go on top of that.
Yeah. So explain biodensity. Is that, are those machines? Is that a destination people should be looking for?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Biodensity ultimately is a spin-off from the power plate company that Dr. John Jaquish, who invented this. His father worked at NASA, helped invent the lunar rover. Very smart people.
Yeah.
They invented this device to reverse his wife or John's mother's osteoporosis, which they did very successfully.
So this is OsteoStrong, right?
Well,
that we're talking about?
OsteoStrong is a franchise company, and
Yeah.
OsteoStrong bought Biodensity. And then as
Okay.
they've evolved, they've opened, and they've now they use the patents to use their own technology, which is the same, but it's into 4 devices, which is great. So anybody who can get access to these locations, like OsteoStrong or a Biodensity location with the
Okay.
vibration technology, then these now are accessible. And back when I had my grandmother, it was 2012. We've moved 10 years on now, and there's hundreds of centres all around the world that now can get access to skeletal health conditioning safely.
Well, did I tell you about my mom? Did I ever
No,
tell you that story?
never.
So my mom, I want to say 7 years ago. My mom is now, she might shoot me for saying this, but she's 86.
Wow.
So she was about the same age as your grandmother. She could
Yeah.
barely walk. Her osteoporosis in her hips was so bad that it was actually causing pain.
Oh,
And as it turns out, there's a Biodensity gym, an
location.
OsteoStrong,
Yeah.
5 minutes from her house.
Oh, fantastic.
So I made her go. And within a year, she has no issues.
Really?
She has no issues walking. She hasn't given me her bone scan results, but from a symptomatic perspective,
Yeah.
she's a completely different person. And she's like little Miss Mighty Mouse. Like she sends me her stats every once in a while.
Wow. Well,
And so I think what's really important for people to really get their heads around here is, and in particular for deconditioned people, but even like I'm pretty well conditioned. I couldn't lift 4.2 times my body weight. There's no way I can get in position to move that kind of weight. It's really, unfortunately, it's really going to take a very specialized kind of equipment to put me in that position. And I used your equipment at the Health Optimization Summit last June.
yeah.
It's a very unique experience. It's highly frustrating. I'm not going to lie, because you're working as hard as you possibly can and nothing's going anywhere.
But remember, for 5 seconds, you get to see it on the screen, your force
I know.
production,
It's
which
very
is super. That's what engages people. That's what engaged my grandmother. She started to see her strength gains increase week by week. And the other thing, we generally talk about the bone density when we mention biodensity, but we must also acknowledge that when you're putting that force through the body, like your mum, who's 86.
Yeah, she's 86 now.
We have to remember that the ligaments and connective tissue in her wrists, her elbows and knees, her back, that's all recruiting and strengthening the whole ligaments and connective tissue. So if your mum was unfortunate to fall, it's sometimes not the weak bone density why she breaks, it's the lack of deceleration. So we have to remember everything's connected, and we need strong bones, but we also need strong connective tissue. And it's lack of impact. And like the heaviest thing my grandmother lifted at that point, I think, was a cup of tea. She literally went back to bingo. She started to go out dancing. She wasn't kyphosis. Her shoulders were back. Now she's breathing better. She's not on her organs. She's got a zest for life. We have to really think about this as that we're emotional beings, and all we are is a set of emotions. So when we feel good and we see improvement in his life, it's way more than just strengthening the physical body. That's the standard that we should have, because we kind of have to walk around in this body. So we have to look after it. But again, the emotional side for your mum, I'm so pleased to hear that, because it's life-changing, especially at that age, because it gives you back independence and ultimately be pain-free.
Yeah, no, it's 100% quality of life. So, which is my point, right? If we're going to plan to live into our 90s and beyond, and we're going to be hiking and doing all the things,
good quality age as well, not
and
just
good
the age.
Exactly, we want quality aging. So going back to our swimmers, our rowers, our cyclists, and what was the first one? Swimmers, rowers, cyclists, and there was another. Anyway, whoever the fourth people are, you know who you are. Yeah. Non-weight bearing exercises. You may have a very strong cardiovascular system. Your flexibility may be good. Your bones not your bones. I mean, your bones will be okay, but you're not, certainly as we hit those ages where we're losing more than we're building, if you're not providing the stimulus to build, to overstimulate the building side versus that breakdown side, which is naturally going to increase as we age, you're going to start to lose ground, and that it's going to show up at some point.
Completely. A lot of yoga people, I don't want to scare yoga people, generally in that category of non-weight bearing exercises, over the years, I've spoke to a lot of incredible yoga teachers that are super flexible, super fit, super zen, very healthy. And we've scanned them, and we are seeing a high proportion of yogis that have got weak bone density. And they're shocked because they actually, I don't know, one yogi thought that yoga increased bone density. And I just said jokingly and lovingly, which downward facing dog stimulates 4.2 multiples of body weight? Obviously, she didn't have a clue what I was saying, but this is what we have to look at, the demographics that's non-weight bearing. Just because you are healthy and fit, and like you mentioned, cardiovascular, great. But we have to look at the foundations of the building, because if the walls and the doors on the third floor are like, need repairing, that's fine. We can do it. But if fundamentally the foundation of this building is not solid, everything's going to come tumbling down.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So I think by now you get it, guys, right? You get it. You got it. It's that 4.2 times the force of your body weight, which is pretty tough to get. So number one, I think the number one takeaway from the podcast is get your bones scanned. And one of the things that Gary said to me before we started is we need to get people sooner. We need people to get even their first bone scan at age in their 20s or in their 30s. Like the tendency right now, and frankly, the guidelines, like our medical system here doesn't start scanning your bones until you're 45 or 50 or something.
It's later than that.
It's too late. It's already happened. Right. So you're trying to make up for lost ground. So number one, if you can take matters into your own hands, I mean, we're going to talk about a technology that Gary is bringing to market that is revolutionary. But even if all you can find right now is a DEXA scan, anything is going to be better in terms of giving you a baseline of where are you, so that, let's say in your 20s or your 30s, you're not great. This is your invitation to step it up now. Don't wait, and understand and go back and look at all those other things we talked about, your nutrition, your digestion, your stress management, all of those things. Plus, are you lifting heavy shit?
Wow, that's great summary. It's great listening to that. That's it. We don't need to say any more. That's done. Just do that shit.
No, we do.
And we
but
don't.
Now we need to talk about bone quality. So what does DEXA measure and traditional bone density machines, like the ones that our medical systems use, frankly, like what are they measuring and what do we need to be looking at? What gives us better information?
Yeah, well, listen, when we look at medical equipment as a whole and diagnostics, the only thing we want to be accurate in is what we're measuring. So whatever modality we're using, we have to be accurate. Now, DEXA is the gold standard. Okay, great. But it's 40-year-old technology that's not moved anywhere moving forward. So fundamentally, if I had a car from 40 years ago, you can see how cars have evolved. You can see how technology has evolved. So in the marketplace, you're going to get other companies that are going to be innovative and looking at getting increased results, better results, less radiation, and there's a company called Echolite from Italy, Echolite REMS technology, and I first heard about these in 2017, where I was very interested because I was working alongside OsteoStrong and Biodensity, and traveling the world, opening clinics and trying to create awareness and education on the importance of muscle and bone health. And I realized that we can't ram the solution down people's neck. We've got a solution. People are like, oh, back off. I'm not 60. I'm like 40 or 50.
Yeah, so I'm fine. I exercise.
So like a decade later, it's a bit embarrassing. I'm kind of coming to this sort of epiphany that actually the journey to bone health starts with knowing your T-score and the quality of your bones. Okay, so if we can start there, and then how do we find it really? We can get access for people to get screened. And then you look at the system. DEXA is a reactive care system, which is part of generally the medical system. It's it has radiation, and it typically just measures the density of the bone. Okay, so if you go get a DEXA scan, it will does full body composition. It measures the femur, the hip, which is related to, if you're going to break a bone, you don't want to break a hip over 65, because the chances of you dying within 12 months is 15 to 30%. It kills more people than breast cancer. And I don't want to scare people, but if we knew these stats, we probably may focus on the bone health more than we actually do. We obviously don't want to break a wrist, but if you break a wrist, it's not as important. But it measures the spine, L1, 2, 3, and 4, and it measures the hip. And from there, it gives you a reading where you fit in. A Z-score basically is your age and where you would be. So if somebody's 87, we would expect them to probably be lower down on the chart. And then if you're above that, it shows you the lines. But DEXA, just so people know, it's radiation. It is the gold standard. There is a high inaccuracy to DEXA. This is just factual. If you had a DEXA scan here in this office and then went across the road and had another DEXA scan, you are likely to see an inaccuracy because it's down to the radiographer to look at the measurements, work out the BMD and capture it. That's why they highly recommend go back to the same radiographer, go back to the same DEXA, so we can hopefully keep the same consistency. So when I learned about REMS technology and realizing that it's ultrasound, it's actually consistently 10% more accurate than the DEXA, and it's mobile. I'm thinking, this sounds almost too good to be true. And then I looked into it, and it's actually a spin-off from a research center in Italy that's purely been about research. And I was blown away. And I thought, if Apple could design a DEXA scan, this would be it. And of course, it's Italian, so it's very well designed. But more importantly, more importantly, this is what really got my interest, is that while a DEXA shows the bone density, this actually gives you the other side of the coin. Let me just take a step back. The reason that DEXA is important is because it gives you an indicative number of what is the chances of this individual fracturing over the next 10 years. Okay, that's ultimately that's its reason. We want to know if you're at risk over the next 10 years, and we mitigate that risk. Well, Echolite REMS also measure the microarchitecture, the bone quality, okay, which is super important. And let me give you an example. If you've got normal bone on a DEXA scan, okay, great, tick, go away, you're absolutely fine. If you've got osteopenia, obviously there might be some interventions that go in place, but that doesn't tell you the whole story, because if you have normal bone but really poor bone quality, you actually have a higher risk of fracture than somebody who has got osteopenia and a good quality bone score. So with that information, just think how valuable that is. And that's what I was just sold and convinced on. So when I started to look more into this company and the way that they're going about it in such an incredibly responsible way, I realized there's a new concept of bone health here. This is not a reactive, I'll figure it out later. We need to be proactive and preventative. We need to create awareness and education and scan. And here in London, I'm actually in Leeds at the moment, but here in England, whilst I've been here for the last few months, I've been working alongside, government, corporate companies, the King Edward VII Hospital, and there's some great initiatives happening. Even West Street, we scanned Lord Anthony the other day. We're going to be meeting in Westminster to hopefully screen the health secretary. And I say this because, every government is challenged with burdens of health cost. And let's face it, more importantly, people are dying. The amount of people that die of a hip fracture, it's avoidable. So this is why I love the screening. So if we can start to screen earlier, it's not just let's get more people screened because we should. Osteoporosis, like I say, starts at age 30. And there was a famous rheumatologist, I won't say his name because people may know who he is. He's 51 years old. He works here in England. He's quite a public figure. 51 years old. He came to one of our locations in Marylebone at Untitled. And we wanted to sort of, try and educate this famous rheumatologist on Echolite. And, we thought he'd love it. And he did. And, he said, I love your passion. I love your excitement. However, Gary, I don't see why we'd be wasting resources on screening people that way. And I said, well, do you mind me asking how old you are? He's like, I'm 51. And he looked fit. He genuinely looked like he looked after himself. He wasn't one of these doctors that's just 10 hours a day working and not, looking after himself. And I said, well, do you mind if we scan you? And he said, well, I don't see why you would. And I said, well, let's scan you. I said, maybe we should scan you.
We won't charge you.
Well, yeah, we won't charge you. It's for free. And anyway, he understood the bone quality, and that's actually got he's like, okay, that's interesting. I'd love to know that. Have you had a DEXA scan before? And his response was, no. Why would I? I said, well, that's a great question. Why would you? Well, let's see why you would. And not that I was hoping he may have osteopenia. There's a part of me thinking, well, let's just, So we scanned him, and he literally had minus 2.6. He had osteoporosis of the hip. Okay. His spine was minus 1.8, osteopenia. Now, I said to him, I want to be able to scan the conveyor belt of people that are coming along from age 30. Your question was, why would we scan? Now, you're age 51. If I could give you the last 21 years of data from age 30, would that be useful? And he said, well, of course it would. I said, okay, why would it be useful? And I had to be careful where I went here. And he just said, well, because I'll be able to intervene. And if I knew I had osteopenia at age 37, I'd do something about it. I said, and that's simply our mission. We need to proactively know the information, because what we don't know, we can't manage. And then he's completely on board. He's going to be, it's not public yet, but he's going to be coming on the board to help us here.
Amazing.
And now he really truly recognizes that, if we really want to help the skeletal health crisis that we have to create the awareness and education. And again, it's not just about increasing bone density. If we can screen much earlier, then we're going to avoid, I think that by 2040, we could literally eliminate osteoporosis for the face of the planet, because it's not just the screening. Like Anthea Turner says, one of our ambassadors, she's been on the TV for 20 years. She had a DEXA scan while she was on a TV program just got offered one, she had it, and she was mortified to find that she had osteopenia. And she really says it becomes the now what? Okay, now what? Now I know, now what? Now what do we do? And that's where I think we've really got to take the responsibilities, because if you get a DEXA scan, you'll get a report and you might go see a rheumatologist. There might be a waiting list. But between that, the individual that sat opposite, like my grandmother, she wouldn't be able to retain the information that was said. So I think we have a real responsibility to create pathways that's automated. So when you get your report, you can sit at home with your family or by yourself, but you can listen to a doctor giving you general advice on what to actually educate just for a few moments. Here's what it is. Here's what a REMS report is. Here's what it means to have good bone quality, and a bit of information, and then a pathway to, if you need to see a doctor, here's a trained, interpreted REMS doctor who knows, and we can pass you responsibly on to that doctor. Because right now, actually, if you go see a rheumatologist and they don't know what REMS is, they're probably going to send you back for a DEXA scan. So I think, as we're growing Echolite around the world, it's a real responsibility here to make sure that if you've got a 56-year-old postmenopausal woman and you've got osteoporosis and low bone quality, we need to make sure we take care here. So we want to then recommend you to one of our bone doctors that is a menopause expert, knows how to interpret REMS, and can start to look at other areas that they need to optimize, not just the bone health. And so we're excited about that.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I mean, I think it's the next evolution of where we need to go. I think it's so exciting. I mean, I've gotten 2 guys in Ontario, and I'm about to get on the phone to them going, what do you mean you haven't done anything yet?
Yeah.
This is important. This is next level, right? But I think the next piece of the puzzle is getting access to the biodensity training, because that's the toughest piece to fill in. And I think that,
well,
I
completely.
think now, that is the most difficult piece of the puzzle. I mean, it's not that it's complicated. If you can get access to technology, it's once a week. It's a half hour. My mom doesn't even have to. She doesn't even break a sweat. She doesn't even have to change into gym clothes if she doesn't want to. She just shows up,
too good to be true.
And she does a biocharger for a bit. She stands in front of a red light panel. I think they put her on a power plate, and then she does her training, and then she's out the door. It's shocking.
Well, let's just touch upon that, because if your mum's doing power plate, right, the reason that is not just to feel good and get blood flow and all of the other amazing things it does. It's a nervous system regulator. It wires and fires the neural pathways. It helps your mum increase stability firing. So again, we'll look at fall prevention. We have to look at, like, where my grandmother was. I didn't actually expect to reverse osteoporosis. I'll actually be honest. I just thought I'm going to do anything I can. And these seem pretty smart people. And it was more concern about my grandmother falling. So I was looking at how can I reduce the chances of her falling, which ultimately reduce the chances of her breaking her bones. And with power plate, we was able to increase her balance by over 60% in 5 sessions, which give her the confidence to actually start moving more. So that might just be the trigger that people need. So power plate is a super powerful modality from everything from, I mean, the research that's on power plate is probably the most researched fitness product in the world. I mean, this is being done by other people, not the company. So we look at dementia, Alzheimer's, all types of neurological challenges, physical challenges, rehabilitation. The list goes on. There's a great podcast, I've got to say, between Dave Asprey and Tony Malini about the power of whole body harmonic vibration and how it's underlooked. So that's a powerful tool as a pre-engagement before loading the bones. And listen, what people can do versus what they will do is very different. So if people don't have access, or do have access but can't afford it, I always want to bring something to the table that what is for free? What can people do now if you have no money? Okay. And there's things, and this is where the resources that we're building out here, I want everybody to get access to optimal health, and whether they've got money or no money. What we do have in common is we all have time. It's just how we choose to spend it, and at what point does it get as priority. So, and it tends to be when people have either broke a bone or on the floor, and then it gets his attention. I really want people to be proactive in it, because if you pay this attention now, what we're really looking for is quality of life, independence, and hopefully time to spend with his loved ones in the later years. We've got to look after his body.
Yeah. So what can they do for free?
So there's a name by Dr. Douglas Lucas, who was a mutual friend of ours, and there's people.
Actually, he's going to be on the. I'm recording with him in the next couple of weeks, so amazing. This is very timely.
Without throwing loads of things out there for free, I mean, he has a great resource page, a community. Because listen, everything that we go through in life, if we're on his own, we'll probably tend to procrastinate and not do anything. We need to feel like there's a community and that there's other people that are going through what we have. So he's built out a whole community, Bone Collective. It's phenomenal, and the resources that I looked at that are for free I was blown away by it. And his mission is like ours, very similar. It's to how do we educate the world on the importance of muscle and bone health. And he's a doctor, he's a previous orthopedic surgeon, and he's a huge fan of Echolite, a huge fan of the Biodensity and Power Plate. But again, it comes back to what supplements do we need? We really need to get the expert clinical advice. We can't miss out that. And that's why the power of collaborating with doctors. My job really over the next 3 or 4 months, I'm working with a lot of doctors here, to how do we create the new wave of doctors? Because they're the experts, you know. I'm kind of maybe the visionary and somebody who's helped the grandmother that cares deeply, but how do we take all that complexity, simplify it, and get it to as many people as we can? So one of the rheumatologists, for example, who's got a 2-year wait list, a very incredible guy, Dr. Tahir Mahmood, that works at the Shard in London and Harley Street, he's got a 2-year wait list and he sees 9 people a day. And he won't mind me saying this, his mission is to eliminate osteoporosis. Now, I ain't no mathematician, but he ain't going to do it by 9 people a day. So what information does he have? Because he's super knowledgeable. 90% of his information could be collected and put onto resources where people can get access to that information. And then if they need access to the consultant, how do we create more consultants that can actually diagnose their specific results and get them on that pathway to optimal health? Whether it be medication, hopefully that's the last thing that they'll look at. But there's so many things that we can do for free that's on these communities. So Dr. Douglas Lucas, and there's resource pages out there. The Royal Osteoporosis Society in England is great. However, you know, I would be more looking at the more proactive things that we can do, like hopping. I know he has a program that he puts them on and he actually increases bone density, you know, really well for people. But again, we don't know what rate people are dropping. So I don't want to mislead people to say that if you hop up and down and have a banana and take your vitamin D3, you're going to be fine in a year. It's all about managing expectations. And again, you know, when you get involved with experts like Douglas Lucas, and there's many people that he's connected with around the world, they are getting people the results, because guess what? They're scanning them. And then a year later, we're scanning them. So we're putting what we're saying under a microscope. Because don't tell me, show me. And that gets people's interest. And we now have testimonials all around the world where people from 70s and 80s and 90s have had osteoporosis that have completely reversed it. And for those that haven't, they've been able to maintain a steady bone growth. And for those that, you know, want to increase it, athletes, they've increased it to a deviation above normal. So they will literally never hit osteoporosis if they do nothing else for the rest of the world, unless they're really badly intoxicate themselves. But
okay, so power plate in and of itself does not play a role in bone building.
Yeah, I mean, there's research there to show it can increase bone density 1 or 2% per year. But again, it comes back to at what rate are you losing it?
Okay, so if nothing else, it might be able. And I've heard, and I know I've read and did a little bit of research around rebounding is another. It's another one of these things that, I mean, a rebounder is a couple $100, a decent one.
Just jump up and down on the grass, literally.
Or jump up and down on the grass, like literally jumping up and down will be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And you know, you've mentioned vitamin D3 a couple of times, and there's something new-ish on the D3 front that I think is really interesting. And that is, well, so first of all, we know that for whatever reason, vitamin D3 supplementation doesn't always translate into higher vitamin D3 levels. And one of the most efficient and effective ways to make D3 is to have the body make it for you with exposure to UVB lights. And there is a new, I don't know if you've met Goody, but this is a guy who's developed a tablet that's about the size of it's maybe your computer standing on its side. Yeah. And it delivers a very precise dose of near infrared, and then UVB. And he's shown that using this lamp like 5 minutes a day can restore your vitamin D3 levels, which could be part of the formula.
Yeah. And this is a great point. So a lot of people in the Middle East who are covered up because they don't get the sun exposure. You know, we're working there in Saudi and Dubai right now. So again, we have to look at, you know, what is the demographics? What's their biggest challenge? They're indoor. They're breathing air conditioning. They're not touching barefoot on the soil. Some people might think that's crazy, but, you know, we need to connect. We need to ground. We need to earth. We need to get sunlight. And, you know, for whatever reason, the whatever you believe in religion, we are so important that the only vitamin that we can make is vitamin D3, which is really cholesterol, and it's from the sun. We make it ourselves. That's how important it is. It's the only one that we make. Everything else we have to get externally. So that light would be a powerful amplifier towards accelerating, you know, what we need to stimulate and increase bone density.
I'll introduce you.
Amazing. You see,
okay. So we have, the Echolite REMS technology, ultimately, guys, there's about 1,000 of them around the world. And it's growing, I'm sure, every single day. So if you can do you have a search on a website that people
if
can
you go
do?
to screenmybones.com, if you go to echolitemedical.com, and wherever you are, just type in Echolite REMS. It's they're working with governments now. I mean, I really truly see this to be the future of bone screening because it's so accurate, it's less evasive. You can screen anywhere post-surgery. It's not just for the application of checking bone density. You look at cancer patients, the application of this, and this is why King Edward VII College Hospital is very interested. King Faisal in Saudi is interested because sending somebody for a DEXA scan, they can only do it once. This picks up the data and you can't get it wrong. And there's no radiation. We could scan a baby at 2 months old and there's not that we would ever do that.
Completely different
but
kettle of fish. Yeah. And then, so there's that. Then there's the biodensity technology. So either you're looking for an OsteoStrong gym or you can probably Google biodensity machines near me.
Or Performance Health Systems, MSK.com. And that gives you the whole picture because it really integrates everything we've talked about. So it talks about Echolite technology, it talks about power play, and it talks about biodensity, and it really gives you a good in-depth knowledge of nutrition. So actually, that's probably a good website for people to go on is Performance Health Systems, MSK.com.
Okay, great. So we'll make sure we put that in the show notes. And what else? Did we miss anything? I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Fundamentally, I just think the other thing that we're working hugely on is the emotional component, but that's probably a different podcast. That we can't ignore the emotional component to this because we're either the terrorist of our own organisation, and if we're not emotional or have some emotional stability, no matter how much education and awareness we have, we're going to make the wrong decisions consistently that gets us to a place we don't want to be.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it is a different podcast. I think we started the podcast with it. I actually had a mutual friend of ours. Her podcast came out not too long ago, Dr. Olivia Lessler. And she talks about this a lot. I mean, I'm finding myself releasing more and more podcasts on that topic because it underpins literally anything that you're trying to achieve in your health.
Right. What I'd love to do actually for your listeners is there's a guy by the name of Dr. Richard Moore, and he's worked for the last 3 decades on psychosomatic illnesses and how every single emotion is connected to a physical ailment in the human body. And he's got something called Mind Body Detective app. He has a 20-minute summary on the importance of emotional well-being, and maybe I can send you that so it can just be online for people to listen to, because there's something in that 20 minutes I don't know that starts a healing process without sounding too psychologist. It's just, for me, it's mind-blowing how he talks about how we're always being triggered to an unresolved wound that's not being healed. And we have access to the emotions that we're holding on to. And if you don't deal with a back catalogue of trauma and wounds and find a mechanism to process things that are coming at you, then we become emotionally constipated. And no matter what we're doing, this is why most health problems are there, because we're all very smart. We're born healthily, or some of us, most of us, but we have access to the right information. But for some reason, the decisions that we make repetitively gets us into the unhealthy state we are. So no matter how much goodness is out there, and it keeps coming out like that vitamin D3 light, which I can't wait to hear about, is that we're not going to go for it because you're speaking to the people that are emotionally constipated. So again, the emotional component with the physical component, I think, is the whole component that we need to bring into the whole picture. 100%.
Well, Gary, thank you for your taking on this mission, because it's a big one, but I think it's going to have a massive, well, it's already having a big impact. And,
no, I'm super excited. I probably need to sleep more and stop being a hypocrite, but I'm super
Cortisol,
passionate.
don't forget.
Cortisol,
okay. So where can people find you, or should they just go to Performance Health Systems, MSK.com?
Yeah.
Do you want to give anybody else another touch point? Or if they want to learn, and if there's a practitioner here listening to this going, I need to get my hand on one of those Echolite REMS machines, how do they do that?
So go Performance Health Systems, MSK.com is a good one. GaryRhodes.io is my own personal, which I'm starting to really try and build my own personal brand. Why? Because I think when you've got something worth saying, you've got a responsibility to bring up forth your own personal opinions. And on there, I want to try and take all of these amazing things, because I'm working with FibroScan on liver health. I'm working on a lot of other things as well. Not that I want to be everything to everyone, but what I found out is that all roads lead back to skeletal health. And if you're a dentist, health starts in the mouth. If you're a hepatologist, it starts with the liver. If you're me, who's not a doctor, but it starts with the foundations. Whilst we all have this saying, the reality is that last time I checked, the ankle's connected to the knee, to the torso. And,
Mhm.
you know, an ankle surgeon's just going to look at your ankle and not look above the knee. So I think we need to really be holistic. And I try connect the disconnects like we
Yep.
all do, and make sure that we have a better understanding to, okay, we could strengthen this bone, but what else are we missing? And I think that's why I'm going to build a personal brand more, to give more resources and really truly collaborate with experts that are out there. We've got so many amazing people that actually are introverts that are not heard. So people that get on a podcast like we do is great, but some people have so much knowledge, but they don't express it. So I think it's a responsibility for us to bring them forth and give them a platform to give that amazing information.
Love it. So GaryRhodes.io, that's your website. And then Performance Health Systems, MSK.com. And there's also EcoliteMedical.com. But I think you can get to everything through the Performance Health Systems website, right?
Yeah, and GaryRhodes.io, if you just put your details in there, if there's anything at all whatsoever that you've heard on this that you want to get more clarification on, myself or one of the team will reach out and we'll help in any way we can.
Amazing. Gary, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you
Likewise.
so much for your time and for everything else. And I look forward to meeting you in person again and getting that scan done and really just to sharing your mission out with the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.